Mr. Shapiro, you have the floor, sir.
And may it please the court. Good morning. I wanted to start with a couple of thank yous, if you'll indulge me. I want to thank the court for conducting this trial in a civil manner. This is a civil justice system, and I think it's a testament to that. I wanted to thank Deputy DeMizio and Deputy Coley for keeping this courtroom safe and helping you through the process. I'd like to thank the Kowalskis for listening patiently and respectfully. I know that a lot of the things I've had to say have been tough for them to listen, but they've listened with grace and integrity, and I thank them for that. I'd like to thank my trial team sitting behind me, too numerous to name, but we've all been here. I'd like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your service. This has been a long 9 weeks, and indeed we started in the summer. But you've listened patiently, you've asked great questions throughout the process, and we appreciate your active engagement. But most importantly, I want to thank these people, the people of All Children's Hospital, and they've given me the privilege of standing before you to be able to tell their story. And that's what I plan to do during my time. They want you to know that All Children's did not harm this family. Not just the people here, but the people back working at the hospital. They want you to know that. We are here because we believe on behalf of the hospital practiced safe, evidence-based medicine, and we're here to defend the hospital's right to practice that medicine. And I've put up a list here of the witnesses because you've heard from a lot of people, so when we talk about witnesses, if this helps orient you to who's who, this on this side is who I represent. On the other side are people you've heard from that I do not represent and who we are not responsible for. It's almost Thanksgiving, so I put up the pie. And I don't know if this is an interesting memory, but way back when we did jury selection, you may remember we had a little bit of fun. We talked about pie and what your favorite pie was, and I've learned that some people don't like pumpkin pie, which is incredible to me, but that will be an interesting topic at Thanksgiving. But the reason why we had that moment was because there was an incredibly important question that followed it. Can you judge this case fairly based on the evidence? Can you hold the plaintiffs to their burden? They have the burden to prove the claims. And in fairness, Mr. Anderson and Mr. Whitney have welcomed that burden. And most importantly, can you reach your decision here based on the facts and the law and not on sympathy? And that's important because this is a sympathetic case. Nobody is denying that this is a sympathetic case. In fact, if you didn't feel sympathy in your heart, you wouldn't be human. But the judge has instructed you, and everyone here took an oath, to make sure that their verdict is reached on the law and the evidence and not on sympathy. In order to know how we got to All Children's, we need to take a little bit of a step back, and I think it's going to be very helpful if I can walk you through the treatment and what happened leading up to All Children's, because it was almost like a Quentin Tarantino movie where you saw a bit of the end, then a bit of the middle, then something in the middle, then something at the end. And what I intend to do with you is walk you through. And actually, the case begins before the 4th of July. You heard from Dr. Wyndham in his deposition testimony. He spoke fast, but these records are in evidence. And by the way, if you look in the lower right-hand corner, if there's a document you want to see in the jury room, I've tried to reference every single one. So, for example, this would be Defense Exhibit 3050, 1 through 4, if that helps you, if it's something you want to see on your own. Before the 4th of July, before the incident, the Kowalskis went to Dr. Wyndham with the cough that you heard the audio of, and Dr. Wyndham said, there's nothing that I can see wrong with the lungs. The pulse ox is normal. And he says, something really is not right. This is not just asthma. He advised the Kowalskis to watch the steroid use and noted at the end that the parents were arguing about taking her to the emergency department and questioned the role of family dynamics. We know from this picture that on July 3rd, Maya and her brother were participating, healthy and normal, in the local July 4th parade. We also learned about CRPS. We learned a lot about CRPS. We learned from almost every expert here that it starts with an injury. But what we saw when the Kowalskis presented to the Sarasota Memorial Emergency Department, that the onset of this was getting worked up about the 4th of July, And when the fireworks began going off, there was some trouble with breathing. We know in the note that Beata Kowalski gave the prednisone, and IM, intramuscular, a shot of Benadryl with no resolve. And then even at this very first visit, this emergency doctor, Dr. Brett Williams, noted his concern of a potential psych component. Let me orient you to the several presentations of the All Children's Emergency Department. The first one was July 6th to July 11th. And by this point, Maya had presented in a wheelchair, less than 72 hours after the initial onset. And of significance, she was seen by a pediatric neurologist. Very early on in the presentation, Dr. Joseph Casadante of the All Children's Pediatric Neurology Service wrote that this was an unusual presentation. It's associated with what he believed was a habit cough, putting his impression in agreement with Dr. Wyndham. Physical therapy was consulted because of the presentation in a wheelchair. And at this point, we start to see what starts to appear more and more in the records, which is that Maya, patient, wants to make sure therapy stops, physical therapy, occupational therapy stops when she says so, and that, according to mom, Maya needs more pain medication. Maya was discharged from this hospitalization on July 10th, and the initial diagnosis was chronic steroid use and a habit cough. Less than a week later, Maya comes back with her family to All Children's. Now we're on July 17th to 20th, 2015, so this is still more than a year before she comes to All Children's. And when I want you, this is an important piece of information. This is from Joint Exhibit 100854. When the plaintiff said to you in their case, nobody at All Children's ever suspected conversion disorder or somatization, remember, he said that to you, prior to October 2016, it's right here from Dr. Kilgore. In the history and physical from July 17th, 2015, her differential diagnosis included psychological pain, conversion disorder, and somatization. And it's important because in opening argument, you may remember the plaintiff told you that at the end of this admission, this is right before they go to Lurie's, the doctors threw up their hands and said, Mr. Kowalski, we have no idea what's going on. The record says otherwise. The record says even at this early date back in July of 2017, the differential diagnosis of a psychological pain conversion disorder was in their records. Now, again, conversion disorder does not mean that Maya's not feeling real pain. Let's make that very clear. But there's a psychological component to this that does not require ketamine, and we'll talk about that. Now, what we unfortunately start to see a pattern of is what the defense would respectfully suggest is a history of unnecessary medications given at dangerous doses. Unnecessary medications that are given at dangerous doses. And it started back at this admission on July 20th, 2015. And it started when the discharging nurse noted Mrs. Kowalski was adamant that they would need a PICC line, peripheral inserted central catheter for transfer, but the All Children's team warned that doing that with a commercial flight was both inappropriate and dangerous. The Kowalskis made their way to Lurie Children's Hospital. For a second opinion, totally appropriate. They're going back to their trusted children's hospital in Chicago. World-class hospital. And we heard from the emergency department physician, Dr. Petzenberger, that upon his first visit with Maya in the emergency department, Maya was able to show good upper and lower extremity strength by kicking with both legs. And now his diagnosis is fitting that of Dr. Kilgore, that the behaviors were concerning for a psychiatric component, possible conversion disorder. And again, this is not a question of somebody saying that Maya is faking it. This is real. But it calls for a different treatment pattern. Now, a lot of what you heard during cross-examination was, are you an expert in CRPS? You remember this. Every doctor, are you an expert in CRS? Well, they met one, and you heard from him. Dr. Gatti Revivo, from Lurie Children's Hospital, board certified in adult and pediatric medicine. He testified he has significant experience with CRPS. He told you it was regional, and he used the Budapest criteria. And back then, he started what we believe is the evidence-based medicine, and it's simply this. CRPS or conversion disorder, the treatment is physical therapy, occupational therapy, and cognitive behavioral therapy. And at Lurie's, ketamine, intrathecal clonidine pumps are not what they use. Then there was one of those things where we call sort of a dramatic moment at trial where my partner, Mr. Hughes, put up the picture of one of the scratches at All Children's that the plaintiff claims is a CRPS lesion, and asked him, what do you think? He said it was a scratch. That was his opinion, which is going to go, we're going to come back to that when we get to the All Children's admission. She was seen by a pediatric psychologist, Dr. Lowry, who also noted an exam inconsistent with the history. And again, their belief at this world-class hospital was conversion disorder. But importantly, her recommendation, as she told you under oath, was for non-pharmacologic intervention for the pain. You also heard testimony from Dr. Elizabeth Byrne. She was a pediatric hospitalist that at that time was also assessing complete and normal strength in upper and lower extremities and believed this was triggered by conversion disorder and wrote it in her note at Defense Exhibit 3032-127. And she specifically wrote on that date back on July 24th, 2015, that the exam was not consistent with the history, which raised the concern for a psychiatric component. And this is the important part. She will likely benefit from a therapeutic program that combines physical and psychological therapy to address both weakness and pain access, and with the appropriate therapy, she's going to return to baseline. Remember that, because this is the exact recommendation that's made at All Children's, as we're going to see, and not just All Children's. The family returns back to the Tampa Bay area and checks into Tampa General Hospital under the care of Dr. Kornberg. Dr. Kornberg, on his very first visit, writes in his note, and again, this is at Defense Exhibit 3047-21, that there were some inconsistencies in his exam. That's okay, but his impression is now exactly the same as what Dr. Kilgore wrote at All Children's, which is exactly the same as what Dr. Byrne wrote at Lurie's, that this is psychological factors affecting physical condition. His first impression of the case. Then we get to Bonnie Rice. It's an interesting comment about Bonnie Rice in opening argument. You may remember it, you may not. It's been a while. But the plaintiff said, this is the Kathy Beatty of Tampa General. Like there's a county-wide or Florida state-wide conspiracy among providers who have never met each other. But they said it because they don't like what she had to testify to. Because what Bonnie Rice testified to was that there was a psychological component, and then talked about some of the family dynamics that Dr. Wyndham talked about. And I don't mean to bring this up to cause any more embarrassment, but this is an important issue, because what Bonnie Rice said was that Maya was telling her about how her mom was working and how she was trying to get her attention. She talked about the feet going inward and outward volitionally. And she talked about how mom was respectfully asked to leave to see if the condition would improve, and it did. And that there were multiple stories about falls that Maya had told them at Tampa General, and they put her on video monitoring. Dr. Kornberg does his own independent reassessment a week later, and notes volitional movement in all extremities, but their performance is variable, and documents that Maya is now asking for more oxycodone when mom is present with her. Saying the same thing as nurse practitioner Rice. And then we get to what I believe you found was dramatic testimony from Dr. Jennifer McCain, who came here and testified before you and repeated a lot of the same statements that nurse practitioner Rice saw. And the neuropsychologist, the director of pediatric neuropsychology at Tampa General, testified to what she wrote in real time about Maya being upset with her mom always working, about Maya having difficulty with movement in that discussion, And respectfully and honestly, Mr. Kowalski, according to her record, had told her he saw a lot of the same. A lot of the behaviors were filled with exaggerations. And then there was a comment that didn't probably appear as important at the time, but becomes important later when we get to 2016, about Maya not being motivated to return to school while she's recovering. And what was Dr. McCain's diagnosis? Psychological factors affecting physical condition. This is what we mean when we talk about standard of care, right? This is what we mean. We're going to look at the jury instruction later. What do similarly situated healthcare providers do under similar situations? You can see the pattern here. And back in 2015, Dr. McCain was recommending follow-up for mental health professional services, including psychological and psychiatric. And so when you're thinking about damages in this case, and when the Kowalskis are asking for, we'll talk about it, but money for future psychological care, this recommendation is being made far before Maya comes to All Children's. And then there was another dramatic moment at trial, and I think you remember it because it was sort of one of those silence is deafening moments where they showed Dr. McCain the video of Maya trying in therapy and the giddy up horsey. We've seen it a few times. And Mr. Anderson flat out asked her on the witness stand, "You still think this is conversion disorder?" She said she still believes it. We heard from a wonderful therapist, Marissa Higgins, and she loved Maya. Absolutely. She came here to advocate for Maya. She should. She's her therapist. But she had to also acknowledge the uncomfortable fact, it's at Defense Exhibit 3047, 3055, page 7, that there was a difference in behavior when Maya was with her mom versus when Maya was on her own. And she noted attitude of family, attitude of self. And if you're wondering, why am I going through all this? Because Mr. Anderson just sat up here and told you, why did All Children suddenly have alarms raised? Where did this come from? The pattern is building. It wasn't just them. On the discharge summary from Dr. Kornberg, who you heard from, who, by the way, we had to read him. No one was wearing wigs to have a moment of fun, but we had to read his testimony. He flatly denied saying he was going to break Maya's legs, and his nurse practitioner said that's not anything this kind doctor would do. But now, after being seen by pediatric intensivists, neuropsychology, psychiatry, neurology, dietitians, undergoing an EMG study where they're putting needles, arms, back, everywhere, which was fully tolerated without any sense of pain, this was the discharge diagnosis at Tampa General. Suspected conversion disorder versus factitious disorder. And all they recommended at Tampa General was this. If you go through physical therapy, occupational therapy, it's going to be painful, right? You're going to have to work through this. Non-narcotic medication, maybe some medication for pain control, you're going to improve and recover. That's what Dr. McCain testified to when she was on the stand. My belief is this child is going to recover and be back in school in August. And Dr. Kornberg reinforced it when he said to the Kowalskis, stop taking these medications, including the oxycodone. I'm going to try to orient you to some of these events by what I call little charts, because it's a lot of information to take, and this is just my sort of demonstrative to show you that in what's less than 2 months, from July 4th, we go from wheelchair to hospital, 3 diagnoses at All Children's, Lurie Children's and Tampa General, 3 world-class institutions, multiple specialists seen by pediatric neurologists. They've all coalesced around the same diagnosis. Suspected conversion disorder. That doesn't mean your pain isn't real. It just means what you need is physical therapy, occupational therapy, and cognitive behavioral therapy. And you should return to normal. And by the way, not just them, right? Not just them. Defense exhibit, actually this is joint exhibit, the J is joint. Joint exhibit 1066, number 3. Dr. Wassenaar, their trusted pediatrician, what did he say? When he saw Maya after being released from Tampa General, he wrote in his record too, there's significant behavioral overlays complicating the assessment, and noted his concern that despite seeing the note from Dr. Kornberg to stop taking the oxycodone, that Maya is still using 2 milliliters of liquid oxycodone several times a day. And what did he write in his impression before anyone thought we would be here in court? Joint Exhibit 1066, his impression. Behavioral disturbance with possible conversion disorder. The same diagnosis being made at 3 other hospitals, their pediatrician. And somehow all these people missed what they believe is the diagnosis of CRPS. You know where this first appears? I think you caught this, because everyone here is taking great notes and taking great attention. Mr. Hunter noted this. This is where this appears. The first time you see RSD in the record is from a note from Dr. Kreisman. He's a pulmonologist at All Children's. And he notes in his record that reflex sympathetic disorder is the most current diagnosis. She got this from a Facebook group. Talking, I think the testimony was she had a friend, Beata had a friend who had RSD, and she came up with this diagnosis despite 3 world-class hospitals and their own pediatricians steering them towards what the proper therapy and diagnosis was. And even again, Dr. Kreisman is encouraging the family to continue psychotherapy and plant some seeds to continue therapy. Then we get to Dr. Kirkpatrick. No board certifications, no hospital privileges, meaning he's not submitting his credentials to a hospital committee to say, can I practice there? We've heard from Dr. Bifolco what he charges. Actually, I think it's $12,000 now for cash for 4 days of ketamine. And he testified that Maya had a poor response to his treatment, so he had to send her to Mexico. But look what he wrote in his note. Joint Exhibit 1056. He wrote, it's also been suggested there's a psychogenic component to her pain. Was it reasonable for him, knowing that, to start pushing ketamine? And look what he also wrote. He recommended evaluation by a pediatric internist. And then he discussed the risks of ketamine, which have been tried to be downplayed in this courtroom. But fortunately for all of us, Beata Kowalski took excellent notes, didn't she? You've seen a lot of her emails. She took excellent notes. Let's hear from her. Here's her Facebook post. 10/12/2015. This is after Dr. Kirkpatrick. Tuesday was a lot harder than I expected it to be. She had hallucinations with monsters, which made her feel very scared and terrified. Mumbled, double vision. It was just Maya, ketamine, and me taking this curvy, bumpy road to fight RSD. This is really important what's written next. This is really important what's written next. STM, short-term memory. Short-term memory challenges were hard to handle. Couldn't remember my name, where she was, state she lives in. Here's what's also important. Ketamine's no big deal, right? At the end of the infusion, her saturations went down into the 70s, and she couldn't breathe well on her own. This is being given in an office, not in an ICU setting. She got very close to becoming intubated. This is what I mean when the defense says unnecessary medications being given at dangerous levels. And so here's the timeline for 2 more months. She's back at All Children's getting the MRI. We see the record from Dr. Kreisman. We see the diagnosis from Dr. Kirkpatrick on the first visit, and then 4 infusions, the refill of oxycodone from Dr. Wassner, and she's already in All Children's Hospital for abdominal pain. And Dr. Kirkpatrick had to write her not 1, but 2 refills for a hydromorphone pump. And by the way, this is before she could even get to Mexico. Was the ketamine working? Did they need a hydromorphone pump? This is at Defense Exhibit 3402A. You're going to see this exhibit contains not just the hydromorphone, but all the oral ketamine that was being drank in the meantime. They go to see Dr. Cantu. Cash pay. If you look for his records, you're going to find few. I can't direct you to them. Apparently there's some labs in there, but I can find very little. To his credit, one of you asked an excellent question. An excellent question. Among all the great questions, I thought this was one of the better ones. Dr. Cantu, is this coma controversial? Because it's obviously they don't do this in the United States. And he said, yes, it is controversial. We do this as a last resort when everything else fails. Right? That's what he said. This is being done to Maya less than, 6 weeks after Kirkpatrick gave her the diagnosis? And again, Beata Kowalski, to everyone's benefit, wrote exactly what's going on at this point. I'm the youngest child in history who's developed severe generalized RSD, and I'm the youngest child who's going to be placed in a high-dose coma. Acknowledging this procedure is high risk due to all of these complications, and they're at risk of total body failure and death. Coma day 2. Gagging in her throat with, thank God my mommy was right there, she helped me, to suction my mouth to prevent death. There's the recollection of ketamine giving magical powers. And when you look at actually what happened, what they were worried about the front end, remember the sepsis and the death? It's right here. Last night was rough for me. My temperature went up again. I became tachycardic, heart racing, and restless. The sputum gram stain came back positive for gram-cocci. Now they have to give the antibiotics. And then the statement at the bottom, she's got a high tolerance for drugs. The amount they were giving her, if she was a horse, she would be comatose or dead. It continued throughout the coma. I don't mean to belabor this. This was not a spa day in Monterey. This was a very dangerous procedure that almost ended her life. All of these are back in evidence at Defense Exhibit 3148. Upon return to the United States, they saw allergist and immunologist Dr. Alvin Mendez. He came and testified to you. Remember his testimony. He talked about that, again, just like Dr. Wyndham, he didn't see the asthma, normal lung function. He also expressed his concern about all the steroids she's getting, unnecessary medications at dangerous levels, and that, as he wrote in his note, he was concerned about a psychological component to this. He said, Munchausen's by proxy. So when the plaintiff said, after Dr. Kirkpatrick got involved, nobody ever suspected anything other than CRPS, not true. Not true. Dr. Mendez did, and he put this on a letter to Dr. Wassinger. It's at Defense Exhibit 3031, number 10. Let's look at our timeline. Now just November and December. Remember, this is only 5 months after the 4th of July, riding the bike normally on July 3rd. Not just the coma in Mexico, but we're back to Mexico again for booster and booster and booster. And they want to tell you the ketamine's working. Well, let's see if it worked. Beata Kowalski to Beata Kowalski. Relapse January 13th. Blurred vision, massive headache. The pain in my head is so intense I could hardly say anything. Worse each day. Relapse. And by the way, look at the last line. I was taking the ketamine ATC around the clock every 3.5 hours. So when you look at the chart of infusions, does it include the ketamine she's drinking, the anesthetic that she's drinking? This is in addition to that. We get to Dr. Hanna. And again, no hospital privileges. Advertises his services at ivketamine.com and nopainhanna.com. No referral. Told you he didn't know whether any psychological counseling is going on. He's the one who prescribed the oral ketamine. And fortunately for all of us, Dr. Hanna puts in his records these, you've seen these. He does it almost for every visit. January 25th, 2016, quality of life is 2. After the coma, after all those boosters, after Kirkpatrick. And then we get to Dr. Barr. Him and Mr. Hunter got a little testy, but he ultimately told you he wasn't the one who made the diagnosis of CRPS. But then we got to, again, wonderful jury questions from one or more of you. And if you remember why, he came on right after Dr. Chopra, right? I think it was the next day. Somebody here asked the brilliant questions because Dr. Chopra tried to downplay ketamine. Dr. Barr, thank you for your service. Let me ask you this question. Do you think ketamine has these symptoms? Withdrawal? Yes. Nausea, vomiting, heart racing? Yes. Is there a risk of addiction? He said yes, depending on the length of treatment. And then the ultimate question, do you use it? No. I recommend the evidence-based approach of non-narcotic pain control, physical therapy, and occupational therapy. And then he wrote in his note, which is at Joint Exhibit 1039, that her pain was throughout her body. It's like fire. Is this ketamine working? Well, let's go back to Dr. Hanna. Quality of life 3, March 25th. Month later, quality of life 3, April 25th. Look at the timeline. Over 30 infusions just from January through April. Going back to All Children's Hospital in January for abdominal pain. This doesn't even include all the oral ketamine, which we can't track. Then we get to Dr. Spiegel. Dr. Spiegel is giving hyperbaric oxygen therapy. No one here is criticizing it. If the Kowalskis wanted to pursue it, ultimately it's, I think as you heard, it's a relatively benign treatment, whether it helps or hurts. But his consultation note is what's interesting here. Because he was unable to examine Maya when Mom was present, but when Mr. Kowalski was there, he could. Is the ketamine working when a neurologist writes in his record on May 13th, 2016, that she has whole body pain and was a vegetable due to severe pain? Is it working? What about his exam of the extremities? No change in temperature, no change in color, no swelling. That's what edema is. And then you remember you saw this medication list? This is an evidence. 2 full pages of it. Let's go back to Dr. Hanna and see if the ketamine's working. May 13th, 2016. Still a 3. June 24th, 2016. Still a 3. Let's hear from Beata Kowalski again. Week of 7/10/16. In addition to the 5 treatments of hyperbaric oxygen and 3 days of ketamine, 3,000 milligrams, I've been very forgetful from the ketamine. Short-term memory is definitely a problem. Sometimes I can't tell if it's AM or PM. Did I even eat breakfast or not? Did I have my ketamine yet? Did I go into the chamber? Everything is just a blur to me. Back to Dr. Wassner, and you heard the testimony that Maya was asked to go back to school, and the Kowalskis challenged that. What did he verify as a signed statement to the school on the hospital homebound form of August 24th, 2016? Is Maya under medical care for an injury that is acute, catastrophic, or chronic? Yes. Remember that statement when they're going to come back and ask my client to pay them $30 million for future CRPS care, $10 million or whatever the number was. This is 2 months before she comes in, and she's too sick to go to school. In fact, Dr. Wassner said she cannot even attend school with an accommodation, and she has to be hospital homebound. Is the ketamine working? Back to Dr. Hanna. Here's the letter he wrote to the school district. Maya case suffers from horrific disease, RSD, CRPS. Look at the pain scores. Look at the pain scores. 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10, migraine 10 out of 10, severe weakness, nausea, vomiting, and then this statement. She's unable to eat or drink for 3.5 days. This is serious for a child this age. Here's the timeline. May through September. 19 more infusions plus who knows how much oral ketamine. And Dr. Wassner is saying she can't go back to school. It all culminates in this. On October 5th, 2016, Dr. Hanna at Joint Exhibit, I don't have the Joint Exhibit, I apologize, it's in his records. He writes a script for malnourishment. Nutritional consult needed due to patient being malnourished, low body weight, iron deficiency, anemia, and chronic nausea. And we learned on the last day of rebuttal testimony from Mr. Kowalski when he took the stand. I wasn't aware of this. Mrs. Kowalski was at this appointment. She wasn't taken to the doctor that day. Mr. Kowalski went back to Dr. Hanna's office. And here we are. And here we are. 55 infusions, a ketamine coma in Mexico, boosters in Mexico, oral ketamine occasionally around the clock, days of not eating, days of not drinking, short-term memory problems, and her quality of life is a 0. And if you want to know why All Children's intervened, it's because of this. Look at what it's, by the way, this isn't just ketamine. This is 100 milligrams of Versed needed to control agitation on October 6th. 2 vials of ketamine, 14 vials of Versed, 8 vials of Zofran for nausea and vomiting. You can find this record at Joint Exhibit 1040. You know what's even more shocking is the weight. You can check his records. She didn't gain a pound from when he started seeing her in January until he finished seeing her in October. Look at what, this is the old meme, how it started, how's it going? January 14th, 2016, his infusion started over 4 hours with 1 vial of ketamine, 8 vials of Versed, 4 milligrams of Zofran, and by the time he's done, 2 vials of ketamine, 14 vials of Versed, double the Zofran to keep the nausea and vomiting down, magnesium sulfate, and now we're up to 100 milligrams of Benadryl to control for the allergic reaction. This is what this looks like. This is what this looks like. Look where Dr. Patrick started. These are high doses, by the way. The green line at the bottom is what Dr. Crane testified to, the low dose that they use for refractory CRPS occasionally. These are the doses. In fact, I ran out of room on the right. 24.1 milligrams per kilogram per hour. I think the testimony is 30 to 200 times the dose given in an office. And to Dr. Hana's credit, he did say, I sent her to All Children's because I failed to help her. This is not ketamine working. He failed to help her. He could not control her pain with maximum doses, and he was not comfortable going higher. You have heard a lot about the hurricane, right? Like why are the Kowalskis so insistent on saying when we went up for a hurricane, we know they were staying at the Ronald McDonald House? Because they know if this is true, what Dr. Hana said, it's an admission that the ketamine failed. It's an admission that the ketamine failed. And now we get to my client's institution, the hospital that I have the privilege to represent. No signs of withdrawal. What was the very first thing Dr. Bayar Posey said in the emergency department? Her differential diagnosis, she testified to by video. Differential diagnosis, number 1, withdrawal, including the abdominal issues, and having to cancel exams because they wouldn't give 1,500 milligrams of ketamine in the ER. Dr. Tepa Sanchez spoke to you. Board-certified pediatric critical care medicine. She was kind, but she talked to you about what she saw. Mom demanding a ketamine coma with intubation. This allegation that we're trying to falsely imprison her, we were trying to transfer her from moment 1 because we are not an acute care, a chronic care facility that at that time was able to treat, whether it was psychosomatic disorder or whether this was complex regional pain syndrome, that required long-term treatment. She testified to you under oath, the family never asked to leave. How about Dr. Dolan? She testified with you too. Oh, and by the way, I think it's important to note, the diagnosis that appears in our record that you see at the bottom, chronic diagnosis, complex regional pain syndrome diagnosed by outpatient physicians. It wasn't our diagnosis. We respected it. My clients respected it, tried to treat it. This was not a diagnosis we came up with. This was a diagnosis that came from an outside provider. Dr. Dolan noted the same thing again, first day of admission. Mom requesting a ketamine coma. Dr. Dolan told you that she was shocked by this. Dr. Dolan also told you she reached out to Dr. Hana. They weren't ignoring the outside consultants. They were getting her input. So why did All Children's intervene? Why did All Children's tell the Kowalskis, we would like you to stay? They did not tell them you cannot leave. They told you we would like you to stay. It's safe to stay here because of this. Because of Nurse Thatcher, her notes. Mom asking to prime the lines with propofol? Giving rewards of Valium for tolerating a CT scan? And the hospital's supposed to look the other way on this? That's the coward's way out. What about these notes from the ICU? What about the one given by Nurse Klink? I'm tired of all these lies, my life is a lie. They're supposed to ignore that? Remember that statement because it repeats itself in Dr. Lewis's report. How about this statement? Maya hasn't eaten in 5 days because she's not allowed? And then this is the ultimate one. Mom says if we can't get her pain controlled, we may as well consult hospice so she can finally get enough medication and just let her die. The coward's way out is to let them leave. People who care about children do not let that child walk out the door without talking to the family. This is alarming. And you know what? They did. They did. And what was even more alarming about this is you hear these statements about a hospice consult, and at the same time, some of the nurses are saying she's totally fine and resting comfortably when mom's not in the room. You remember this. And if you think I'm making it up, let's listen to Mr. Kowalski.
When nobody else was in the room but Maya and the staff, she acted completely normal. When Mom would walk in the room, she was instantly
I heard that many times.
There's no other explanation for that.
Yeah, I noticed it too with myself being home, and then Mom comes home from work.
And all of a sudden she's back.
There will be changes, yes.
So you're at home, your guys are doing well, they're playing.
No complaints about pain.
No complaints about
But then
that.
when Mom gets home,
She's in
maybe-
pain.
Let's talk about the period where they're alleging my clients imprisoned them from October 7th through 13th. This is a relatively straightforward one because my clients took meticulous notes during this time period. Dr. Dolan, discussing the weaning plan, recommending transfer to other facilities. For a hospital that wants to imprison someone, this is awfully bizarre behavior. This is at Joint Exhibit 1001-633. Look at the bottom. We had a long conversation with the parents. Look at what they're recommending in the second paragraph. Recommend CBT, psych involvement for treatment, as this is part of the standard of care for CRPS. Respecting the diagnosis that this could be CRPS. What she needs is long-term cognitive behavioral therapy and physical therapy. And they're trying to find the services for it. And not just Dr. Dolan, but Dr. Elliott. Long discussion with the parents twice. Parents in agreement with plan of care. That's October 11th. How about Dr. Smith? She came and testified to you. Discussing the weaning schedule with the mom, it was all agreed to. How about Dr. Smith the next day? Again, keeping the parents completely involved in the discussion who agree with the plan of care. Now, if only we had an email to put all this to rest, right? Wouldn't it be nice to hear from Mrs. Kowalski? What'd you think? That would help settle this, wouldn't it? Beata Kowalski to Jack Kowalski, talking about being accused of trying to take Maya AMA against mental advice home. That's a lie. That's Plaintiff's Exhibit 2408-1739. It's in her own writing, written to Jack Kowalski, and there's no reply in the state saying, actually, I do want to take her out. And you know why? Let's listen to Jack Kowalski again.
I mean, when we were in the meeting with the doctors one day, and Beata wanted to take Maya out, sign her out, and I said, hold on, time out. And this wasn't in the, wasn't written down, which I was kind of mad about, but I asked the doctors, I said, what's the time frame you're talking about? And they explained. I said, that's doable. And was my wife happy with me, what I said? No, absolutely not.
Okay.
So you have to, there's times I'm going to go the other way.
Okay. And thank you for sharing that.
I don't know why they didn't write that down.
I don't know why they didn't write that down, my agreement to stay. Let's talk about the EEG room. This is their second allegation of false imprisonment. You heard from Dr. Paula Deese, who ordered this study, and she told you she ordered it for clinical purposes, and we know that because she testified to the inconsistencies noted in the record. Those are real. The inconsistencies are not something that originated with Dr. Deese in her mind. We went back in time and showed you all of the records from Tampa General Lurie's. We don't need to go backwards. But she had a resident order it in the seizure monitoring unit, and she believed she had consent. And by the way, she noted in her record that there were no acute events overnight regarding room 709. Dr. Dees told you she believed she already had consent from a signed consent from Mr. Kowalski, who has testified to you he never revoked it. And as part of the consent, which is at Defense Exhibit 3002-001, there was an understanding that this could include videotapes, photographs, and closed-circuit television monitoring of patient care. Let's look at the room. Defense Exhibit 3304-001. This is the dungeon. This is a room like every other room. There's no difference in the room other than in the top left corner, unlike the other rooms, this one's got a camera. It's equipped so they can watch children having seizures. It's also equipped to do monitoring if the doctors have concerns about seeing inconsistent efforts. We have video of what went on. It's all been provided. Dr. Dees wanted to know if this was possible. Could Maya tolerate the blood pressure cuff? The room where she has her teddy bears and blankets? Is this the dungeon they're talking about? Where they're brushing her hair? In her dress? And by the way, there's been a wild allegation that Maya was left in her feces and urine. They've had that video for 5 years. If that was true, you would have seen it. If that was true, you would have been shown evidence of it. It didn't happen. If you want to know whether this is standard of care, look back at Tampa General, Defense Exhibit 3047-0674. They did the same video surveillance monitoring there too. The Kowalskis are not suing for invasion of privacy. They're suing you for false imprisonment and wanting to know, the jury instruction on this, and go to your package, is whether all children had authority and consent. Where's the restraint? Where is the restraint on this? Where would punitive damages even be considered involving a false imprisonment of intentional misconduct when they're putting Maya in the same room as any other room to check her true abilities, combing her hair, bringing her in and out of the room for different therapies? On the balance of probabilities, the only thing you've ever heard is Mr. Kowalski tell you that some unidentified person threatened him with arrest. That's it. And on the other side of the scale, you have the signed consent form, 5, 6, 7, 8 notes agreeing with the plan of care, but you don't have to listen to our records. You have Beata's email and evidence. You have Mr. Kowalski's voice and evidence. And this EEG room is identical to others, and that's important because when you look at the judge's instruction on what false imprisonment is, the person has to know they're being restrained. The person has to know they're being restrained. And if Maya doesn't see a difference in the room like any other room, they can't prevail on this count. Let's talk a little bit about Dr. Sally Smith. This part's undisputed. She has no orders in the chart. And by the way, this is actually quite important, so let's make sure everyone understands. There's obviously, and you've seen so many sidebar conferences about the dependency court's not part of this action, right? You've been told over and over again, All Children's Hospital is not responsible for the separation of Maya from her family. We are not being sued for anything that Sally Smith did in her role on the child protective side. It's only if you think that she did something on the medical care and treatment in the hospital you could hold us liable for. So if you're in the deliberation room wondering if you're checking the box for Dr. Sally Smith, and I would implore you not to, and I'll show you why, it would have nothing to do with went on in dependency. That's not part of this. She never directed treatment. She made suggestions for what she needed, and you heard from Dr. Alexander that All Children's absolutely has to cooperate with the CPT investigator. That at all times, Dr. Sally Smith was acting in her role as a CPT investigator. The idea that there's something improper about our hospital, our employees who care, calling Dr. Smith on a, what do you think? Given what we saw in the ICU, including the statements of talking about terminal hospice, that they're going to pick up the phone and say, hey, you've been at this for a while, what do you think? Would they prefer the standard of care be like just call the abuse hotline every time? This is exactly what you want people to do in this situation. And again, on the question of apparent agency, we got a document. So this is going to be helpful. Again, Plaintiff's Exhibit 2408. They've told you we had no idea who Dr. Smith worked for. Beata Kowalski to Beata Kowalski and Jack Kowalski. October 11th, I had another supersized visit from MD Dr. Smith, who was sent by Child Protective Services to investigate. The question of apparent agency arises in terms of what the hospital held out, what the Kowalskis understood. It's right there. This is an easy one for you to check the box on. Let me transition back to the medical care. If there's a document that I believe you should spend time on, it's the neuropsych report of Dr. Lewis because it answers a lot of questions. Not the doctor from All Children's Hospital. Okay? He met with Maya and submitted a psychological report on October 18th, 2016. We can walk through this. Maya denies a lot of statements in here, although in fairness to Maya, she said she didn't read it. The plaintiffs have tried to contradict this, and they have to, right? They have to, because what's written in here tells a story. I'll leave it at that. Joint Exhibit 1046-0007. The first thing that I thought was important to recap here is, well, Maya was drugged up, so the statements she made couldn't possibly be true. Remember that? Except in the very first part, they talk about the 3-hour session going on, and it was noteworthy that Maya wasn't in pain because she hadn't taken any pain medication that morning. Maya talks about some of the abuse that, we're not here to over-dramatize, but it's there. And then she talks about childhood memories and her fear of being told about the ketamine coma and the 50% chance of it killing her. And when you're asking the question, has Maya suffered trauma in her life? The answer is yes. Did All Children's cause this? The answer is no. Remember that statement, my life is a lie, and they went after Nurse, I believe it was Nurse Klink on the witness stand saying, where'd you get this from? You're making this up out of whole cloth. Look what Maya said to Dr. Lewis on October 18th, 2016. I really don't want to have the RSD, and I really don't want to go back on all those pills or have the ketamine anymore, but I am afraid to tell my mom how I really feel because I don't want her to be more sad or upset than she really is. She talks about in the last paragraph about getting back on the medicines that could have killed her. What did Dr. Lewis say about the effects of ketamine on her developing brain? He discussed psychomotor slowing, a known consequence of prolonged use of benzodiazepines, Valium, and dissociative anesthetics such as ketamine. He didn't say this in preparation for a lawsuit. He wrote this in real time out of grave concern for Maya. And then he wrote that Maya has numerous findings in her clinical diagnostic interview of trauma, and that this and the depressed mood need to be a focus of individual trauma therapy. The recommendation for trauma therapy occurred before All Children's ever got involved. You met Dr. Jennifer Katzenstein, a neuropsychologist with All Children's Hospital. Her diagnosis is identical to Dr. McCain's at Tampa General, identical to Dr. Lowry's at Lurie Children's. Psychological factors affecting medical condition. And by the way, she had a very pleasant interaction with the Kowalskis, and I would suggest to you that, Maya's behavior at All Children's was wonderful after they got out of the ICU. That was the two differences in the witnesses that you saw of people talking about the chaotic scene in the ICU is real, right? It's documented. But by the time Dr. Katzenstein gets involved, and the weaning had been done and the withdrawal symptoms had been done, and then the Kowalskis say, well, how dare you, All Children's? You didn't do all the cognitive behavioral therapy that is necessary. This is why they were trying to transfer. And indeed, Dr. Kilgore wrote that the treatment for her physical symptoms and inability to walk from conversion disorder is intensive cognitive behavioral therapy, and we do not have the staffing here to accomplish it. This is why they were trying to transfer Maya to an institution where she could get the rehabilitation. And nevertheless, despite, as written here, Dr. Katzenstein having a full patient load, she walked over to All Children's Hospital, I believe it was somewhere between 15 and 20 times, gave 5 hours of cognitive behavioral therapy, and would have given more, except she rightfully respected some of the times. Mr. Kowalski was visiting with her daughter and said, that time's more important to you. But this is why they're trying to transfer. And this is on Defendants 3115. And when you listen to this, you tell me if you think that Miss Beatty is speaking with anything other than kindness.
Can I help you?
Hi, Maya's mom. This is Kathy Beatty with All Children's Hospital. I'm the social worker. I'm here for Maya.
Okay. How can I help you, Kathy?
We have the, excuse me, I'm sorry. We have the acceptance from the ward, and we are getting ready to transfer her to the ward, but we need your consent to do so.
We have a meeting today in regards to Maya's future plans. So we'll have a meeting today in regards to that at, I believe, at 3 or 3:30. And we're meeting with our attorneys today regarding that issue.
Okay.
So
Are you giving us consent or are you declining consent?
I'm not doing either till I speak with the attorney and the coalition. We have 2 meetings today.
The wild allegation that Kathy was trying to be her mother at the same time she's trying to transfer her to a hospital in Orlando makes no sense when you see that Miss Beatty is doing everything she can to get Maya to the right level of care. And if you want to know why they really weren't anxious to get Maya out of the hospital,
My bigger question is, why would a parent go to these extremes?
Because I'm told this is the last resort.
But you're saying it's not. And this is not, I mean, all it would have taken was a question from you somewhere along the line that are we doing the right thing? Maybe we should go back and talk to another doctor, do something more conventional, not something that's likely to kill her.
I'm effective of keeping her here. That's what I told you. And if they think something else, I'm supportive of keeping her here and looking.
that was on November 18th, 2016. And by the way, this is important. It came up earlier, and the plaintiffs haven't argued it, but they are not seeking damages in this case for allegations of Munchausen by proxy. You can put that out of your mind. Not from this hospital. Despite Maya staying at All Children's, and despite not having the cognitive behavioral therapy in the amount that was necessary, Maya was still seen dozens of times by Billy Cecil, who you met. He told you about his significant experience with CRPS, and he told you about the improvements that he saw. He told you by the end of his sessions that Maya was able to sit in a wheelchair with no back support, no arm support. And one of the jurors asked him, is this still evidence-based medicine? You saw her in 2016. Is this still what they do for CRPS? And he told you yes. The physical therapy is the evidence-based practice. I want to transition to something that's very important because it was a big deal until the defense got the case. You remember in the trial there was a lot of objections. You know, they did this. Objection, watch your pronouns, right? Watch your pronouns. The Kowalski's anger, rightfully or wrongly, is that the people in yellow, the people that took the communion, the people that blocked visits rightly or wrongly, they owned it. Now, I've given you a timeline. I don't want you to rely on this, okay? It's not going back in evidence. The judge has given you an order. The order is on visitation. They're very important to watch. But here's what you need to realize. When you're being told or when you're assessing evidence of whether a visitation was denied, whether something was taken, I need you to ask this question deliberation. When and by whom? When and by whom? Was it during a period that no one was allowed in? Was something taken by somebody that was sent by DCF, not by All Children's? Because you heard from Charlotte Laporte that all communications had to be supervised and that she stopped some correspondence from going to the hospital. She told you Kathy wasn't part of the calls, and she confirmed that the voice on the recording was hers.
I would love to see a film. I would love to see a film. We just have to wait for the judge to make the decision, okay? As soon as he makes the decision, then I'll be able to see you. Okay?
Beata?
Yeah.
We're not allowed about the case, okay? Maya, honey, we're going to talk about what you've been doing, if you need any Hopkins or things like that, if you had nice visits with your daddy, but we can't discuss the case, okay, honey?
That's not Kathy's voice. They know this isn't Kathy's voice. They needed to have you believe this was Kathy's voice because they've got to find something outrageous. That not that an interruption of a call would get to that level. She's talking about Hopkins. She's from the upper Midwest. But the thing about this is we don't have to guess because, again, I got an email for you. Look, and just so we're on the same page here. November 15th, 2016. Look at the email the next day. Charlotte Laporte to Beata Kowalski. Also, yesterday when you were on the phone, I had to redirect you due to the case being brought up and mentioning of the judge and his decisions. This is thank you, Your Honor. This is Trial Exhibit 3217 at 573. The interruption of the phone call wasn't Kathy. I don't know. I'll leave it at that. But the need for redirection, whether it was by Charlotte Laporte or whether it was at a time, and again, you have to ask who and when All Children's was allowed to supervise calls, was because of this.
And I'm not.
Because I know Mom talked to her once, and that was supervised.
Supervised.
And I guess she got shut down many times because she was falling off.
She could.
And I told her,
You heard from Tori Nias. She was a Save Children's Coalition person. She took the stand. She took ownership of the situation, didn't she? She told you that she was advised by Charlotte Laporte and Lizzie Massica about what items could come in and what could stay. She told you she was the one who removed the communion, the iPad, the food from the fridge. She allowed some items. And again, whether you think that was overzealous, whether you think that was justified, is not an issue in this trial against All Children's Hospital. No one's alleging she's our agent. You heard from Lindsay Massica. She told you she was the one responsible for DCF background checks and visitors and what she prohibited, razors and communion, about what she allowed. And again, whether you think that was right or wrong, she's not All Children's. So that's why you have to ask who and when did these incidents go on. Now, there were religious visits, and take a look at the top note. Who helped arrange them? Kathy Beatty, 11-8. Social worker worked with pastoral care for Maya to get communion. We know from Father Costello, he came and had a visit with Maya. If he was denied a visit, you have to ask by whom and when. We know from the notes that both Father Herbert and Father Coover also visited, provided Holy Communion, emotional support. So why is Kathy Beatty being vilified in this situation? Well, because of this. For better or for worse, social work is assigned as the liaison between DCF and the hospital. The same way social work is assigned as liaison when you're getting discharged. If anyone here has ever been discharged or worked with one for your mom or dad to get to long-term care, they're the ones who help coordinate it. She was the bearer of bad news on October 13th and became the face to the Kowalskis of the communication. She's been accused of a lot of things that are just false. I'll just tell you they're false. Remember the dress? There was a request to bring dresses to the office, and she told Mr. Kowalski, this is in evidence 3217-0784. Thanks for the update. She'll be happy with her dresses. And then you heard from, there was a big deal about she never got her dresses. And then you heard from social worker Padron. who didn't just testify to it, she wrote it in the record. This worker dropped off Maya's dresses plural. Maya appeared in good spirits and showed a lot of excitement for the dresses. We have photos of the dresses. More photos of the dresses. These are all in evidence. We have photos of the birthday cards. The reason why the original card didn't get through was because they had to be scanned to Charlotte Laporte, who then sent them to Kathy to print and give to Maya. So if the Kowalski still have the card with the lipstick on it, that's why. This is at Defense Exhibit 3217-718. The scanned card was printed and delivered according to the sworn testimony of Miss Beatty. But unfortunately for Miss Beatty, she became the face of the bad news. She testified, I was the one who had to tell Maya that she couldn't go home for Christmas. Again, they're not blaming us for her not going home for Christmas. That's a totally separate issue. But she prayed with Maya. She admitted to you that she had Maya on her lap. Not running from that. But I question where we are, that we've gotten to the point where a social worker comforting a child that she's not going to home for Christmas and puts a child on her lap is now a battery? And look at the jury instructions at page 20, because the judge is going to instruct you on a battery. It's not what I want the instruction to be or the Kowalskis. It's what would a reasonable person consider a battery. And I don't want to misquote the instruction. Read it. It's at page 20. The judge has given you excellent instructions. Would a reasonable person consider putting a child on their lap in that moment to be a battery? Is that where we are? Oh, by the way, let's talk about next what I know has made some of you uncomfortable. So let's talk about this head on, the photos, okay? There was no personal cameras used. There was a reason why the photographs were taken, right? So this is January 6, 2017, Dr. Kristen Danielson at the bottom. There was the concern about, quote, in air quotes, skin lesions on the forehead, which appeared to be self-inflicted. Dr. Major wrote the same concern a week later. So the hospital set about documenting photographs of these for the reasons that were written by Dr. Danielson and Dr. Major. And that leads us to the photos that they're upset about and that I know some of you are upset about. This. I'm not going to gaslight you on this and tell you that Maya looks happy. She looks miserable. She does. She's not being held down, though. They're documenting her skin condition twice before she leaves for court and when she comes back from court. And Kathy Beatty told you that's part of her procedure in this situation. Okay? We see the nurse's hands holding her hands, not holding her down. This is part of what they believe is their protocol. And you're wrestling with this. Again, if they just photographed her face, maybe it's not as important to you. They lifted her shirt. There's no Kathy Beatty and Nurse Alcida, who came and testified to you, absolutely denied that she was stripped naked in front of everyone and violated her dignity and privacy. But they took the photos. And we don't need to guess whether these were... Well, the Kowalskis need you to believe this is one set of photos, because if it's one set of photos all taken at once, then they're saying you have no justification, you're photographing her for reasons, right? It's a different bed, it's a different time, because they know if you come to the conclusion, which is what the evidence, the overwhelming evidence shows, that these are two sets of photos taken at two different times, there's a reason for it, right? Whether it's a justifiable reason to take it without the shirt, with the sports bra, or whether they should have just in hands. It's a reason. And we know there were two sets of photos taken because, again, we have a document of it. Defense Exhibit 3217-0850. 6:17 p.m. on January 6th. She's getting back, getting ready to take the picture. If you hear nothing from me, all is good. I'll lock the camera in my office over the weekend. Not a personal phone. It was done and locked in the office. And we know exactly when the photo was taken because it was taken between 6:17 p.m. and 7 p.m. when Miss Beatty documented that the photos were done. The pictures were taken with the help of the bedside nurse. with the help of the bedside nurse, and Maya wanted to pray. And in the last line, Miss Beatty went and got some grapes and cut red peppers from the cafeteria for Maya. Sometime between 6:17 and 7 p.m. on January 6th, the second set of photos were taken. But the Kowalskis want you to believe this is the second photo. With the sun pouring in. With the sun pouring in, long after sunset on January 6th. They need you to believe there's one set of photos. Because when we show you there's two, there was a reason why this was done. Again, Maya did not like the photos. I'm not trying to sell you that this was a pleasant experience for her. It wasn't. But you heard from Tashana Duncan, who saw her in court after the first photos were taken. Dr. Duncan said Maya never complained to her. Again, I'm not trying to minimize that Maya didn't like the photos, but she didn't go to the psychologist that day and say that she was traumatized by the photos. She didn't tell her uncle Scott. You heard his brief testimony on the last day of trial of the defense case. He said she looked happy and normal. Talk about whether Maya had an advocate during her time at All Children's. Well, in addition to her parents, in addition to their attorneys, she had a guardian ad litem. And I think the guardian ad litem who was there only to advocate for Maya, answered a lot of the questions towards the end. She described Maya as a nice girl to talk to. She described her room set up with dolls, that she was happy, laughing, giggling. They went and played piano together. And she was asked, did you ever hear anyone at the hospital say anything bad about Mrs. Kowalski? No. You heard from Sylvia Ballwig on the last day of the defense case. Nurse Ballwig with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stars from the Care Journal. She loved Maya. 17 shifts. She talked about a religious relationship. She worked the EEG room. You think she would have left Maya in a filthy condition? Her? She loved Maya. You heard from Amanda Cook. And by the way, this is who All Children's is. It's these people with a healing touch. Nurse Cook talked about bringing the mission of Jesus to her work every day and bringing the healing touch of Christ to her patients. She brought Maya gifts. Maya wrote a little heart behind her name. This is who All Children's is. Lisa Reck, a bedside nurse, the spa days, the nail days, Halloween, helping her with Harley Quinn makeup. She brought her laundry home to make sure Maya had clean clothes. She was nominated by Maya for a Daisy Award. This is who All Children's is. Does Maya look happy in these photos? They tried to make this awful experience as humane and comfortable for this child that they loved. This is who All Children's is. Not just these four. They all loved Maya. Look at the date. It shows you Maya's bravery and perseverance too, doesn't it? That even on January 9th, after she lost her mother, Maya took pen to paper and thanked Nurse Lindsay for her exceptional care in the hospital. Nominated her for the Daisy Award. That's who All Children's is. And this is who All Children's is. Maya Angelou has a beautiful quote about human nature that I live by. People will forget what you said, and they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. This is who All Children's is. People dedicated to try to make Maya's life in the hospital a little more comfortable than it needed to be. and that's the people I represent. Maya was discharged on January 13th from the hospital. I make a big deal about the medication sheet. It's in evidence. It's a lot. It looks like a lot, doesn't it? Aquaphor, a cream, an ointment, acetaminophen, Tylenol, vitamins, heartburn, the lisinoprostol is heartburn medication, albuterol for asthma. You know what's not on this list? No opioids, no narcotics, no ketamine. All Children's is proud of making sure Maya went home without these drugs. The judge at page 7 is going to give you his description in the jury instructions about Maya being released from shelter at this date. And at this point, Maya's with her parents and released from any other restrictions. Let's talk about experts. And I can't cover them all because I don't have time, and there were a lot of them, but I want to talk about a couple. This is an instruction that the judge is going to give you about the believability of witnesses. You want to talk about the intelligence of witnesses, but I want to focus you on the bottom part about the reasonableness of the testimony in light of your own experience and common sense. Because a lot of what you heard, we didn't need experts for. Some of it we did. Perhaps the most boring and confusing topic came from Jason Banger, who was the billing director of Billing Cycle. He talked about the DRG codes because the plaintiff made a huge deal of the fact that all Children's billed $500,000 for CRPS care, except what did he tell you? That it was all part of a DRG diagnostic-related group code. The pre-authorization was approved, and the entity that, if they didn't think we were providing the care for what we were billing for, was Aetna. They had 500,000 reasons to say, hey, guys, you're billing for CRPS along with all these other things, and you ain't providing the services. But what did he tell you? Every one of them was approved except $11. That's how meticulous Aetna was. They matched the services with what was being billed. And the reason is because what All Children's was providing was, as Mr. Banker told you, the primary driver was room and board and the therapies. And there's been no expert testimony to the contrary. We'll talk to you about Dr. Chopra. They brought him in. Again, no hospital privileges. It's a pattern. He told you ketamine's non-addictive, no nausea, no problems. I believe that was contradicted by Dr. Barr. But he told you something super important. Super important. CRPS is a lifelong condition that never goes away, right? If that's true, why on earth does All Children's Hospital owe $10 million for future care for CRPS? We didn't cause it, if she has it. You heard from Dr. Elliot Crane. CRPS, no known cause, rare and regional, thus the name chronic regional pain syndrome. It takes years to spread. Although, in fairness to Dr. Chopra, when he came back, he did say, in his cases of seeing whole body CRPS, it takes some time to spread, not 72 hours. But he told you the foundation of treatment, the evidence-based medicine of treatment, physical therapy, occupational therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and if needed, occasional medicines for breakthrough pain. He told you that what he saw from Dr. Hanna was 10 times the anesthetic dose. 10 times the anesthetic dose, what they would give you if they were going to knock you out and take out your appendix. And he ultimately told you that All Children's complied with the standard of care. He did that in support of fine doctors like Dr. Richard Elliott, who testified to what Mr. Hunter told you at the start of this case, that the treatment for CRPS and conversion disorder is the same. It's get you out of the wheelchair and let's get you functional. Let's get you moving. He testified that Dr. Hanna's doses were infinitely higher than what All Children's recommended. He also told you that CRPS is not associated with the gastroparesis, the constipation, the food not moving through. Because it doesn't matter what the diagnosis is, the treatment is what matters. This is the treatment that was recommended way back over a year ago at Lurie Children's Tampa General It's the same. And so when you're answering the question on standard of care, and it's in the judge's instructions, reasonable care is the part of a healthcare provider which, in light of relevant and surrounding circumstances, is recognized as acceptable and appropriate by similar and reasonable careful healthcare providers. Well, we provided you this, but the list is much bigger. The list is much bigger. This is what we mean when we talk about an instruction of what do similar healthcare providers recommend. Had this course of treatment been followed back in 2015, we wouldn't have been here. The judge has instructed you that stress from the lawsuit is not a matter for which you can award recovery. Okay, this has been a stressful process for everybody. I get it. It's very natural. The 2020 hospitalization, this is at Joint Exhibit 1030, 0014. Okay. Maya Kowalski went to the hospital for what they claim was a relapse. If you look at the records for what this was, it was a recent episode of epigastric abdominal pain, decreased appetite, and the assessment was a 14-year-old female with significant weight loss likely related to stress. The musculoskeletal exam, no joint swelling, no limb deformity, no rashes, no lesions, no jaundice. This concept of all children's cause some type of relapse, the only evidence in this case of any hospital visit in that period of time, other than a broken finger, which they're obviously not claiming is the fault of anybody, for which she sought medical care, I believe, 48 hours after the injury. Other than that, the only hospitalization was related to stress. So when we talk about causation, for the plaintiff, they first have to prove on medical malpractice we were negligent, and we believe the overwhelming evidence is that all children's practice, the evidence-based medicine that was proven to work at multiple institutions, but they have to do what is in your jury instructions as the but-for instruction, right? Makes sense. They have to be able to tell you that had it not been for all children's, Maya would have been better. They brought Dr. Bifulco. And if you check your notes and if you were listening carefully, Dr. Bifulco made 3 critical concessions that, from the defense's standpoint, cannot support any verdict against All Children's Hospital on medical malpractice. Not just because we didn't commit medical malpractice, but because he was asked directly. And he could not testify what Maya was going to need but for her All Children's hospitalization. He could not testify as what she would need from a psychological standpoint, but for All Children's. He made no determination about what she needed. He was just saying, she's got CRPS, this is what she needs. Dr. Chopra told you it's a lifetime condition if she has it. And then, at the bottom, he made the recommendation for $3.7 million in ketamine, and I said, Dr. Bifulco, where is that coming from? Dr. Kirkpatrick. Why are we going backwards? Why would we, with all of the progress that Maya's made, her bravery, right? I mean, truly, in the face of tragedy and losing her mom and going home, and through, the shepherding of Mr. Kowalski to help get her healthy, we'll talk about that a little more. Why are we going back on ketamine? Do not award millions of dollars for ketamine. Dr. Levy was brought to answer that question. She is the director of adolescence and substance abuse addiction at Harvard. You didn't need to hear from her about whether ketamine can cause hallucinations and mood disturbance. You heard it from Beata. You didn't need to hear from her about the short-term memory issues. You heard it from Beata. But she told you what would happen to the developing brain if you started exposing it to ketamine again and again and again, as in Dr. Bifulco's life care plan recommended by Dr. Kirkpatrick at $12,000 for a week. It would cause addiction problems and potential neurotoxicity. And by the way, when we talk about memory disturbances, if you look back at what they are alleging at All Children's Hospital, and this is really important, almost everything, if not everything, that they're alleging against Miss Beatty is based on Maya's memory, isn't it? I mean, Mr. Kowalski testified that he didn't personally observe anything untoward. The people who came into the hospital, whether it was the teacher or the guardian ad litem or the people that are not affiliated with the hospital, no one saw anything. It's all based on the memories of a 9 to 10-year-old child in the hospital who, by her own admission, was, when she disclaimed the care book, told you I would say anything I needed to get out, including telling these nurses that I liked them, even though I didn't like them, which is understandable. Who would want to be in the hospital away from their family? But that's what it was based on. Those memories from that time. I'm going to handle a topic as sensitively as I can. The plaintiffs called an expert, Dr. Scott Richards. We had a little bit of fun, right? Maybe it wasn't fun, but yours, Mr. Anderson's frat brother, swim teammate, and he told me, well, we listened to different music. We were in different parts of the frat. But he's the sacrifice he's talking about. When I tell you, when you listen to experts and you can use your common sense, right? It doesn't go out the window. The suicide, for better or for worse, was a result, was it not? Doesn't your common sense tell you about her being separated from Maya, for which this hospital is not responsible? You don't need an expert, especially someone who's never evaluated Beata. When you're looking at the instruction, when they're trying to hold my client liable for a suicide, when all we were trying to do was protect Maya, when all we were trying to do was provide evidence-based approaches for therapies that we believed could heal her, what was the extreme and outrageous conduct that they proved through their burden that all children's did? What was it? When you're back in the deliberation room, what was it? The phone call that was Charlotte Laporte, the confiscation of communion that was Tori Neas, having a child on your lap, that's a factor that can be used to say suicide. The uncontrollable impulse, and because there's family here, I'm going to be brief. You've seen how that act was carried out. It wasn't instant in terms of the setup. But there's notes. And the most important one is the one that's at Exhibit 3212. Beata Kowalski, moments after the judge denied her the right to hug her child. We're not here to argue about the dependency court. It's a separate issue. Okay? This note was penned now, 3.5 months, I think the plaintiff said 99 days or 107 days after no contact with her daughter. It's not from placing a child on her lap. The letters to the judge. Oh, and by the way, the response at the end. I hope you will take responsibility for my daughter's physical conditioning, worsening of her CRPS that will eventually lead to her slow and painful death. Where'd you get that? Remember? Dr. Kirkpatrick. Who put that idea in her mind? Not all children's. And by the way, he tried to backpedal, didn't he? Pulmonary embolus? You know what that is. Gone. That's not what he's talking about. Put in Mrs. Kowalski's mind that if she didn't get his ketamine, this would happen. Shame. And then the final note that was now written. This one's now, if you look, just in terms of the time, and I don't want to belabor this point any more than I have or I need to. January 6th, 3:57. Now we're to January 7th at 10:59. 30 plus hours have passed. This is not an irresistible impulse. I need to talk to you about damages, and I'm going to do it briefly. All children's would not be here if we thought we owed the damages in this case. Okay?
Mr. Shapiro, you consumed an hour and a half.
Thank you. But I told you in voir dire, we don't argue damages in separate sections. We don't see if you award liability and come back. We do it all in one part for your efficiency. If you don't agree with me, here's what I would suggest. For medical malpractice, the only thing that Maya would need is a tune-up on physical therapy. You heard from Dr. I don't know if it was Ms. Kirby pricing it out. You can use your common sense. If physical therapy costs $150 a session and she needs another year of it and needs it twice a week, $300 a week times 50 weeks would be $15,000. That would, if you really believe we interrupted her care by not giving her the ketamine and we're somehow liable for medical malpractice, that would be what would be reasonable. I want to talk about the photos because this is important because I know you guys are going to wrestle with this. I get it. You have the batteries were either 2 days in a room, same room as anything else, or we have my shirt being lifted and being taken photos, 10 minutes, 15 minutes on the front end, 10 minutes, 15 minutes on the back end. If you don't like it and you disagree with me and believe she owed some money for that, then you should award something for that. And the judge's instructions, in the instructions, give instructions, and don't rely on this, because these are different instructions for medical malpractice, but the general verbiage are awards should be fair and just in light of the evidence. Awards should fairly adequately compensate for the loss. They're compensation damages for that. If you believe because of the photos that Maya Kowalski needs therapy, and by the way, we think she does too. We think anybody who lost their mother in this circumstance believed that she would benefit from psychotherapy. Whether we are responsible for any of it or responsible for part of it, then award it. You heard from Ms. Kirby that inpatient therapy is $30,000 to $57,000 if you think that she needs psychotherapy for the next period of time. You know, if it's $100 twice a week, if you think that it would take $200,000 in therapy, or you want to award $250,000, those are numbers that are realistic. That's real money. And finally, I'll just talk to you about the unfortunate act of suicide. And I want to tell you that there's the numbers they've put on the board. We have to tie it to real money, not monopoly money. These would be real dollars, written checks to the Kowalskis. If you think we're really liable for a suicide, that we would suggest that numbers from $500,000 to $1 million or $1.5 million, even per person, would be something that would be fair and adequate to compensate for the situation if you owe it. And in terms of totals, whether that's $3 million or $4 million, I think that would be more than fair. But I do want to talk to you face to face about this, because that is a charge that All Children's is here to absolutely deny. We did not do anything that caused extreme emotional distress. The idea that this hospital system engaged in some system-wide conspiracy to try to aggravate Beata when all we were trying to do was get Maya on the correct course. On those boxes where you are required to find outrageous conduct that pushed her to that, I implore you to check the box now. I'm going to touch on this and then we're going to move forward. Because almost all of these damages are this idea that Maya was doing wonderfully well before and now she's in a bad spot. And that's why I spent a lot of time going through the previous history to show the quality of life of zero, the ketamine comas, the short-term memory problem. We got into it, right? Me and Mr. Trump, about the freight train heading to college. And his insinuation that the unfortunate, not her fault, right? Mine was none. The comas, the treatments, the memory, the hallucinations, the quality of life of zero. That's what we inherited. Where's she now? How are we liable for future vocational losses? How would All Children's use your common sense? How would we be liable for any of those catastrophic numbers when, because of the care and treatment, and because of Maya's perseverance, as shepherded by her father, we saw this, May 26th. This is now a little more than 4 months after getting out of All Children's. we liable for worsening a condition? Let's hear what Dr. Hannah said. She went back to him. Joint Exhibit 1040, number 7. This is on June 8th, so what is this? February, March, April, May, June. 5 months after she gets out of All Children's. This decrepit condition we left her in, not a drop of ketamine, right? Let's look at it. Overall, the patient has had 60 to 70% relief since his last visit. What is he comparing to? October 6th, quality of life of 0. And now, through the therapies of All Children's and the dedication of Maya working with Rachel DeYoung, her outpatient therapist, only warm water therapy and physical therapy, she's got 60 to 70% relief. Look at the next box. Negative allodynia, negative hyperesthesia, negative hypersensitivity, negative, 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 negative. What's she doing? Patient reports no hypersensitivity or allodynia. She's doing pool therapy and physical therapy twice a week. That's their doctor. Let's fast forward to July 6th. Agility Physical Therapy. Less than 6 months after she gets out of All Children's, off the ketamine, off the drugs. Patient and father say the patient went swimming in the ocean over the weekend. Mr. Kowalski reports that Maya has a new bedroom set with a bunk bed on the top and is able to get up and down the ladder without help. August 14th, back to school. First time in 2 years. August 22nd, last day of physical therapy. September 5th, back to Dr. Wassner. You want to know what he said? Let's look. Maya's doing markedly better. She's been able to get out of her wheelchair and goes to school full-time with use of her crutches. Father is extremely pleased with her progress. She has not had any recent asthma flares. This is what we mean by progress. October 20th, 2017. (2018, 2019 is easy because we heard from Mr. Kowalski. We played his deposition for you on November 6, 2019. Now, Maya is the president of the Honor Society, president of the chorus, class president, followed by Duke Tip. And what was this sworn testimony to? No evident signs of CRPS, no complaints of pain, and no signs of lesions. What did we complicate? Or what did we help Maya get on the path to? Recovery. I have nothing to fill in here. Thank God. Maya testified she was proud of her progress, as she should be. 8th grade picked PE as an elective, participating in all school sports. She told you 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, no flare-ups, and she talked about a daily routine that should be the envy of any healthy child. 5.5-mile running routine, high interval intensity training. What about the medications? Flonase and Claritin only. Had not touched narcotic pain medicine since she left All Children's. That's the dream we had for Maya. And then I had a chance to talk with Maya again on March 22nd, 2022. Claritin and sleeping pills only. Still playing piano, still ice skating, lifting weights, cardio, bike rides. She made a statement that she should be very proud of, that she told you under oath that her pain is better now than it was in 2015 or 2016. She's able to get back on the ice. And able to get to the point where she's able to enjoy milestones. Healthy milestones, something people dreamt for her. Homecoming 2022, being able to be in a limousine to go to Homecoming 2023 during the trial. And from what I can tell, in the photo on the right, Maya looks happy. I'm asking for your verdict, and I'll tell you why. One of the most unfortunate parts of this case is the caption. Kowalski's versus all children's. We were never against the Kowalski family. We were never against the Kowalski family. The reason why all children's did what it did, the reason why all children's tried to comfort Maya, the reason why all children's tried to get her on a safe medical path is because the loving and caring providers at my client's hospital believed in a better future for her if they could get her off the unnecessary drugs given at dangerous levels. Period, end of story. And time can tell, right? Sometimes we can tell whether they were right or whether they were wrong. On all of these counts, false imprisonment, whether there's any clear and convincing evidence of any punitive damages, and if you think there's an element in this case where she deserves compensation, then that's what you're here for on one of these counts. We disagree. There's nothing outrageous that the hospital ever did. There's no reason to be considering punitive damages. Your work can end with your deliberations. We don't need to come back if you believe you can fairly and adequately compensate the Kowalskis, specifically Maya, if you believe there's anything else. And that's important on all these counts, because you know what we really need in this courtroom is closure for everybody. Now, I don't get another chance to talk to you. That's, as the judge told you, and I'm almost out of time, that it's normal, right? But I want you to have this in your mind when either Mr. Anderson or Mr. Whitney come back and talk. And they're talking to you about this aggravation of pre-existing injury. What would Shapiro say? Well, she had it before. If they're talking about violations of rights, well, what would Shapiro say? Well, when and who? If they're talking to you about, here's what Kathy Beatty did, what would Shapiro say? Well, what's your evidence of this? What evidence do you have of this that you're accusing my client's children's hospital? At the bottom of your form, after you complete the verdict form, and it's long, after you complete your services juries, for which we all in this courtroom tremendously thank you for, you're going to date and sign this. This has been a long process for you. It's been even a longer process for the Kowalskis and my client. It is time to bring closure to this phase. I would ask that your verdict be fair and just. I would ask for it to be in my client. And when you do it, be proud of your verdict, that you're bringing justice to the Venice County Courthouse, to the Sarasota County Courthouse, so that everyone can go home and heal and rest. I thank you so much for your service, and I thank you for listening.